from the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you are with us tonight. We are talking about one of my favorite topics. We're talking about movies. We have not been able to do this for a long time for obvious reasons. We almost didn't get to do it today with the news that broke, but I'm so glad we're going to move forward, talk about movies, and it's appropriate because the Academy Awards are coming up this weekend. So there's a whole slate of Academy Award nominated films for Best Picture. We're going to talk about those, play some trailers from those, and really just get a better understanding. Many of us haven't been in a movie theater in a long time and may not know a lot about these movies. Happy to have with us a film critic with the Nashville scene and writes around town, Jason Shawhan, joining us via Zoom, as our guests do now. Jason, thank you for being here.
Hello.
Hello, thank you, yes. So, all right, before I get into the movies, the slate of movies, I want to ask just about the state of the movie industry, first of all, in our area. You know, are there theaters that are closing? Are they reopening now? Kind of what is the state of theaters in our area right now, post or in the middle of COVID, or wherever we are with COVID?
Well, it's been an ongoing process. The AMC has been with us pretty much for a lot of it. Things were very touch and go for them for a while, but then thanks to that whole weird Robin Hood thing, like where periodically stocks would get like amped up and stuff, like AMC got saved that way. That's going to be a movie someday. Someone's going to tell that story in an interesting way. So, but AMC's been fine. Regal is just in the process of reopening currently. The Opry Mills is currently open, and then I think for this weekend with Mortal Kombat opening, they're opening up a couple others. They've got sort of a schedule through the end of May where they're reopening their theaters locally, and the Belcourt is reopening this Friday as well. And then the drive-ins, bless the drive-ins, the drive-ins are going strong, and you know they're up and running to pretty much the same as they have always been. So for the most part, it remains to be seen if we've lost any theaters locally. Oh, and the film, was it Lone Wolf Cineplex in Hermitage? They're back up and running as well. But yeah, I think it remains to be seen, like if any AMCs or Regals are going to be shut down or are just not going to reopen. But for the time being, I think it's a process, but we're hanging in there, I guess, is the best way of putting it.
And that's good. So Belcourt is reopening, and
Yes.
Regal, and of course we go way beyond Nashville. You get outside of Nashville, and you feel like it's the same kind of thing. They're beginning to reopen now, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, there's like AMC pretty much across the country, except in like places like Los Angeles and New York, where they had complete and total shutdowns and stuff. They've been as reopened as they could be all along. So it's like it varies according to state and local ordinances. It's just there's not sort of a universal state of movie going currently, but everyone is trying to reopen as safely and as best they can.
How do you think COVID will change the movie industry, going to the movies? How is COVID going to change things going forward?
I mean, I think it already has changed things to a certain extent because, if you look at the way that films and television that have been shooting during the pandemic have changed their processes, their safety protocols. There are people whose job now is specifically COVID compliance. On a set, which is great, and I think absolutely necessary. As far as actually going to the movies, I mean, wearing masks is absolutely essential to it. Even if you're completely vaccinated, still it's necessary to wear masks in public. We still don't know the situation with variants, and it's just good sense to me. And as soon as I got my second shot, I waited my 2 weeks, and it was like, okay, I'm going back into a theater, and I did, and I was just like, I had my mask, and it was like it was okay. It was like, this feels somewhat normal, but as considering like how utterly terrifying and strange the past year has been, it was a small price to pay. I mean, like, seating capacities are not the same. So it's like that whole experience of going to see something in a packed theater is not there. But I don't know if necessarily anybody would feel safe in that kind of situation anyway. It's sort of like we're in the baby steps situation.
And we've seen this.
We're making progress.
Right, and hopefully we'll get there. We've seen this whole thing where movies now are going straight to streaming. They're going straight to HBO Max or Netflix or something like that. Do you think that will continue, or is that going to stop?
I think it varies. I think Warner did their big announcement that all of their 2021 films would open the same day in theaters and on HBO Max, and to a certain extent that's worked a little bit, and that they're sort of like back and forthing on that. I don't think that's going to necessarily be a what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think that's going to be policy across the board for Warner titles from here on out. Disney sort of like tap danced around that. They've had a few of their titles that they've put onto Disney Plus. Some of them for no extra fee, some of them for their premium access, which is like their higher tier function. And I think a lot of it depends. I think there's going to be a lot of situations of, if the studio has their own streaming service, they're going to look at that. As numbers change, as capacity percentages change. Studios are going to go where the money is. And for a lot of studios like Paramount, they sold off pretty much all of their stuff for several months to their various streaming services until they got their own up and running. And I think it's just it depends on the studio. It depends on what sort of financial situation they're in with to begin with. And if people are offering and if they've got the numbers on their streaming service. There's so many variables. It's like you couldn't do a graph for it. You'd have to do you'd have to fill an entire classroom with charts and such, which
Right.
is interesting, but it's not exactly fun or sensible or logical for that matter.
There's a lot that we just aren't sure about. But the good news is theaters are beginning to reopen, and the Academy Awards are coming up this Sunday night. The Academy Awards are coming up. And so there's a whole list of nominated movies. We're going to show trailers from a few. But I want to get your overall assessment of the pictures that are up. And I think so many of us are in a situation where we haven't seen movies this year that we would have maybe normally seen. And I bet there are a lot of people out there that know nothing about any of these movies. You had Bill Maher very famously kind of go on there and say, this is just a list of depressing sort of, he really criticized the group of nominees. What do you think? You look at these nominees, what do you think about what Bill Maher said? What do you think?
I don't think about what Bill Maher says generally. I mean, at best, he's an interesting personality. In the 90s, Politically Incorrect was a very relevant and interesting show. But nowadays, I mean, basically, he just serves as a way to what's the word I'm looking for? He's like the left-wing Tucker Carlson in that he's sort of like basically brings these white supremacist talking heads on and makes them acceptable for that group. That's neither here nor there. But as you can say, like tone and mood, that changes completely from year to year. This year's offerings they're different in that no one's been able to do the traditional like big Christmas release, like working the critics, getting approaching like ad campaigns like they normally do for big Oscar winners. That sort of campaign in the past where it's sort of like a middle of the road triumph of the human spirit kind of thing, like those films usually triumph in that kind of situation, like at the end of the year. And this year it's because you've got so many different players. You've got you have Netflix and Amazon who've been fine-tuning their approach in the past few years as to how to get their films across to the maximum number of people. You've got, I think, honestly, the most interesting approach of all of them is with Nomadland, because, it was made by Searchlight, and then Disney bought the Fox empire, and also all of a sudden Disney inherited this film. that is. It's played, it played in it played at the Montana Drive-In in Estill Springs, but I don't think it's played like theatrically in a whole lot of venues here in town. So but because it's on Hulu and it's accessible, I think probably a lot of people who could see it have. So it's weird because, usually the whole process that like the Oscar campaign and the awards movie campaigns, they're built on, like slow rollouts, getting occasional critics groups or like, advanced theater audiences to see it and talk about it. Whereas now it's like that approach, they've sort of stepped aside, and now it's just sort of, get it in the streaming place, get it on a premium VOD way so that the people can see it. And it's interesting. I mean, I think people going to the movies is going to, in some way, approach something similar to how it was before. I think the act of marketing movies, and especially for like big ticket award ceremonies and stuff, those kind of films, I think the way that those are brought to the public, I don't think that's ever going to be the same. I think if nothing else, this is definitely going to change the way that because before these films would come out and it would be what is the way for the public to see this, and they just had to wait until there was like this a release, and sometimes used for a city like Nashville, sometimes that's like middle of January for what they talk about, the big awards caliber thing. And this one is just like there's been a very definitive approach to like get these films available and seen by whatever means necessary, because the traditional theatrical ways that they've done this are not that they haven't been an option this year.
So that makes me wonder then, are they going to continue that? Do you think that works to get, to have Nomadland, which you're probably right, would probably play in a handful of theaters, maybe more, artsy theaters perhaps, and we'd have to wait for it, and that would maybe build some excitement for those who were focused on it, or it's just on Hulu and anybody who wants to see it can go get it. I mean, do you think we do that 2 years from now? Do you think it still works that way?
I think it depends on the film. I think it honestly is going to depend on the film. Some films need the theatrical experience. I think we've seen that with the big budget action tent poles and things. Like they tried that with Wonder Woman 84, and and it did well, but it was just sort of like people were, the response was very harsh. And then, fast forward a few months when theaters have started opening up, vaccines are out there. There's been sort of a shift in that, and then Godzilla versus Kong just is just like kabam, so it's just like, it's doing well on HBO Max, but it's also doing really well in theaters, better than anything else during the pandemic. So for that kind of film, I think there's for effects driven things, or for things where the directors thrive on that theatrical experience, I think you're still going to see them trying to hang on to that sort of approach. But I think with some of the smaller cases, especially with the films that Netflix had, Mank and Trial of Chicago 7 and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and then Amazon had Sound of Metal. I think they might as well. It's like, if you've got a way that you can get it eligible without having to play in a certain number of theaters, that's their normal rule. The Academy's rule is like it had to play a film has to play theatrically in New York and LA on a certain number of screens for a certain amount of time to be eligible for Oscars. And this year, obviously, they waived that, and it was just sort of, it changed the dynamics a lot. So I think definitely you're going to see, if they can keep that waiver going, I think you're going to see a lot of different approaches to how these doing.
All right, the trailers that we will discuss. We're going to discuss Judas and the Black Messiah, Mank, Sound of Metal, Nomadland, and Promising Young Woman. All of those are nominated for Best Picture. There are obviously some others nominated for Best Picture. You mentioned Nomadland.
Yes.
All right, so if I guess handicap the Best Picture category. Who were the front runners, and kind of give us the overview?
I mean, judging by all the other awards ceremonies and such, I think it's pretty much Nomadland's thing to lose. And I hate sounding like somebody talking about racehorses and stuff. And thankfully, when a film doesn't win Oscars, we don't take it out back and shoot it. But I think, just if you look at, across the board, Nomadland hit at exactly the right time, and people are responding to it. I mean, you've got Frances McDormand, who is one of our greatest living actresses, and she is exploring like the situation of what the gig economy has done to a certain level of American worker, and it's a gorgeous film. It's not as sharp edged as I think it could be. It's very placid is not the right word. It's very mellow. It's dealing with issues that should angry up the blood, and it's not about angering up the blood. It's more about finding a way to come to terms with an untenable situation, and it's just got a lot of great performances, and she's incredible. And Chloe Zhao, who directed it, it's she's been making really interesting films, all sort of dealing with the modern frontier, when you look at the American landscape now, what that means, and she does an incredible job with it. And it's a beautiful film, and I think pretty much it's it's even money at this point.
So it's kind of the front runner. It has a bunch of nominations, right? Mm-hmm. And you would maybe call it the front runner. I would say it's poetic. I mean, it is beautiful. It's kind of a poetic film, and that's I like what you said. It is hitting on some hard issues about the current economy and how difficult the current economy is and what's kind of happening, but it's not. I guess it's not hitting you over the head with that. It's just kind of quiet. It's
a little too easy. You could watch this film and be like, oh, well, people who are traveling around the country to work wherever they can, that's a doable thing. That's can-do American pioneer spirit. And that's sort of because they're focusing on Frances McDormand's character, who has a support network, who has family members and, a love interest, and has options in her life. It's a little smoother going down, because you could tell a very similar story to this in a much more terse and unsettling fashion by just making it about someone who has no choice, who is forced to live on the road and go across the country to wherever some work can be found. So it's I hate when critics do this, and of course here I'm doing it, when you beat up a film for what it's not instead of what it is. And what this film is beautiful and evocative. I just wish it had a little bit more of an edge, because it's very easy to watch it and not feel as immediately concerned about such a significant portion of the American economy, that people are struggling. And this film addresses that obliquely. But it's also, just about people who are doing their own thing and making it on their own terms, and that's great. I just wish there was a little bit more.
That's interesting, right? And no COVID. And I think I'm right in saying COVID doesn't really come up in any of the movies that are nominated. That would, I guess, be a little soon. Right. But
it would be too soon.
Yeah, there's not COVID represented.
Yeah, there's right. You're seeing it with TV. Right now, and in film festivals, on the festival circuit, you're starting to see the things that are made during or as a response to COVID. Just last week, the film opened in theaters called In the Earth. It's a folk horror film from the UK, from the director Ben Wheatley, that was made during COVID, and it addresses it obliquely. It's a cameo appearance from COVID playing another disease entirely. It deals with masks and decontamination and how it's been affecting societies, and losing family members to it, but it's not COVID. It's some unnamed disease, which I think that's kind of a nice little touch. Just sort of COVID can be in the movie, but it's not playing itself.
Right. Okay. All right. Very interesting. The other movie, massive nominations, is Mank. Am I right? Isn't Mank nominated right up there alongside Nomadland? And so
it's got the most, I think.
So let's talk about Mank. And maybe should we play the trailer, Taylor? I don't know. We should not. Okay, Taylor says no, but we'll play the trailer beside you as you talk about it. It'll be like on, we can see the video of it. But tell us about Mank.
Okay. It's a period piece set in the 40s. It's about Herman Mankiewicz, the screenwriter who co-wrote Citizen Kane with Orson Welles. And it's basically like a behind-the-scenes warts and all, like of the troubled creative genius who's like working, you know, against the studios, against injustice to like tell the story of, you know, this character, Charles Foster Kane, who is a thinly veiled portrait of the actual publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst. And it's you know, it was scandalous. There's you know, it's Wells, it's regularly acclaimed as like one of the greatest films ever made. Citizen Kane was, and this film is sort of like, well, let's take different looks at the circumstances behind this. It's the director David Fincher, who did Alien 3 and 7 and Gone Girl. Fascinating director. The film is based on a script that his father wrote in the 70s before his death. And it's an interesting film. Like it's beautiful. It's black and white. You can immerse yourself in it. It does that period Hollywood detail. Like if you love old Hollywood glamour, this film's got that in a way that is sort of more immediate than a lot of films bring that across. And it's beautiful to look at. It's really long, and after a while, I don't know. I'm glad I saw it. It's an interesting portrait, but the narrative that it's trying to put forth is very much set on diminishing Orson Welles' contribution to Citizen Kane. And I'm just like, that's kind of, I don't know about that.
Is it a true story? I mean, I've watched it. It took me a couple of times because I think again you've nailed it on the head. It's a little long. It just whatever. So, but I wondered, is this a widely known story or not? I
think for film people, yes. Like in, you know, when I was going to college and in the cinema studies program and stuff. This was a situation that like you were aware of, you know, if you're into Citizen Kane and have done like any sort of research into that, it's known to cinephiles. I don't necessarily think it's like a mainstream known story, and I certainly don't think Mank is a mainstream film, which is kind of amazing that Netflix put up as many millions of dollars as they did for Fincher to make it. You know, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad that, you know, if the streaming networks are going to throw millions and millions of dollars at like, you know, interesting directors to do weirdo projects, like do something strange and weird. I'm all for that. And there are moments in it that are incredible. Like Amanda Seyfried plays Marion Davies, the real life actress, and she's amazing in it, and it's delightful. Gary Oldman plays Herman Mankiewicz. He's definitely too old for that part. I mean, just if you look into that, you're just sort of like it clangs if you're familiar with it. But if you're not familiar with it, it's luxurious. It like, you know, it lets you look back at like the 40s and just see how like, oh, you know, like trying to do the right thing in certain situations. And there's a subplot in it, and it only takes up maybe about like 7 or 8 minutes of screen time, but it's about how the studios started partnering with aspects of the government to incorporate political messages into like advertising campaigns into the movies. And you're just like, oh, I totally would watch a 2.5-hour film about that. But you know, it's just a small part of it.
Right.
But it's like, I was just like, that I could totally go for that. And then the other thing about this film that I don't know, I feel like there's you have to confront a thing about Hollywood, and that's why if Nomadland doesn't get Best Picture, it's possible that Mank could step in and get it, because Hollywood loves movies about itself that tell it how important it is. And no, it's true. I mean, like, you look at The Artist, you look at There's that. I mean, that's the most recent example of it. But if you make a movie about making movies and about how that's important and how justice is done, then you're gonna get some attention. It's sort of like sort of like how one of the nominees in the best documentary film section, My Octopus Teacher. Which is fascinating if you love aquatic photography, or if you just find like undersea critters interesting, which I do. I think most people do. But it's about, I think the reason why it's caught on is not because of the underwater photography or the ocean critters, but it's about how a troubled, a bad dad can sort of redeem himself through a work of art. And nobody's talking about that.
I love that. Yeah, actually, I love My Octopus Teacher. All right, we have to take a break. Okay, we're going to come back and look at Sound of Metal and Promising Young Woman. Two movies I just watched. All right, we'll take a break. Be back right after this.